hard doesn't mean it's over. God never promised life would always make sense, but he did promise his purpose will stand. And his purpose doesn't expire because of your pain. The story you're living is still being written by the author who never fails to finish what he starts. You might be sitting in a place of frustration, a confusion, or regret right now, but you are not forgotten, and you are certainly not finished. This chapter might look dark, but darkness doesn't cancel destiny. Sometimes it takes the darkest valley to reveal the brightest light. You may not feel it, but God is still working. Behind the curtain, beyond the scene, underneath the weight of everything trying to break you, he's still writing, even when you feel like the pen has dropped. The silence you're experiencing isn't proof that he's absent. It may just be the space where he's preparing the next part of your breakthrough. Don't confuse a plot twist with a period. Your story is still moving. Your story is still growing. And even in the mess, God is working a masterpiece. You're not stuck. You're being shaped. You're not abandoned. You're being aligned. You're not rejected. You're being redirected. But the enemy wants to convince you that where you are is where it ends, that your failure defines you, that the loss was final, that the door will never open again. But the enemy only attacks what he fears, and he fears what God has placed inside you. So when the attacks intensify, it's not always a sign you're in the wrong place. It may be proof you're on the edge of the right breakthrough. You were not created to die in disappointment. You were not formed to be finished in frustration. Your value is not tied to your visible progress. God is doing more than you can see. Sometimes he hides you to prepare you. Sometimes he delays the platform so he can develop your character. Sometimes he removes what you thought you needed to reveal what you really needed all along. His strength in your weakness, his purpose in your pressure, his grace in your grinding. So even if it doesn't look like much right now, even if the situation seems broken beyond repair, it's not beyond the reach of the one who restores. He's the kind of God who can bring beauty from ashes, strength from sorrow, purpose from pain. He's not intimidated by the situation you're in. He's not pacing the floors of heaven trying to figure out how to fix what broke. He already knows the ending, and if it's not good yet, it just means he's not done yet. The pit you're in might just be preparation for the palace he's calling you to. The burden you're carrying might be building the backbone you'll need for the blessing ahead. And the door that closed might have shut to prevent you from settling for something less than what God has for you. Don't let one chapter dictate the whole narrative. Don't let one moment make you believe that your story is over. God is still turning pages. He's still unfolding promise. And what you think is over might just be the beginning of something far greater than you imagine. So breathe. Step forward. And keep your heart open. Because this situation is not the end of your story. Delay is not denial. Even though it often feels that way when you're in the middle of it. When you've prayed the same prayer 100 times and nothing seems to move. When you've believed with all your might and watched other people receive the very thing you've been waiting for. It's easy to start thinking that maybe God said no. But what if his silence isn't rejection? What if it's refinement? What if the delay is less about the situation and more about the strength he's building in you while you wait? We tend to view delay as punishment, as if God is holding back something good because we didn't measure up. But God doesn't operate on performance. He operates on purpose. And purpose requires preparation. Some doors don't open when you knock because God is still building what's behind them. Some promises aren't fulfilled overnight because God is stretching your faith, maturing your character, and aligning the right people at the right time for what he's about to release. But when you're in the waiting room of life, it's hard to remember that. It feels like you're forgotten, like heaven went silent, like you missed it. And in those moments, the enemy whispers lies, that God's not listening, that you've failed, that it's over. But the enemy is a liar, and delay is not his proof. It's God's process. Abraham waited 25 years for the promise of Isaac. Joseph sat in a prison for years before stepping into his purpose. David was anointed king long before he ever wore a crown. Jesus waited in the grave for 3 days before resurrection power shook the world. Waiting has always been part of the story because waiting works something in us that rushing never can. There's a weight in the waiting, not a burden, but a glory that anchors your soul. It humbles you, quiets you, matures you. And when you finally step into the promise, you'll see it wasn't a denial. It was God setting the stage. Delay forces you to trust him deeper, not just for what he can give you, but for who he is. When everything feels uncertain, when the timeline has blown past your expectation, when you don't see the evidence yet, that's when faith is truly forged. That's when you learn that God doesn't need to move on your schedule to still be on time. He's not limited by clocks, calendars, or conditions. What looks late to you is right on time to him. And sometimes he'll withhold what you ask for because he's preparing to release something greater than you imagine. But you won't see it if you quit too soon. You won't taste it if you throw away your confidence. That's why the delay hurts so much. Because it tests whether you want the promise more than you want your comfort. It stretches your hope past your logic. It dares you to keep believing when everything in you wants to settle. And even though it's uncomfortable, even though it feels unfair, God never delays without reason. He's not punishing you. He's positioning you. That unanswered prayer might be saving you from something you can't yet see. That closed door might be protecting the timing he knows is best. That pause might be the only thing keeping you in the place where your character can catch up to your calling. Because premature promotion is dangerous. If you get it before you're ready, you'll lose it. So God, in his mercy, often says, wait, not because he's withholding love, but because he's securing your legacy. He's not trying to make you suffer. He's preparing you to steward what he's about to release. But the delay will tempt you to settle, to take matters into your own hands, to accept less just so you can have it now. That's where so many people get stuck. They confuse delay with denial, and they walk away from the very thing God is getting ready to give. But if you could see what he sees, if you could see what's coming, you'd stop fighting the waiting and start embracing it. You'd trust that the same God who gave you the vision has every intention of fulfilling it. You'd recognize that the pause doesn't mean the plan changed. It just means the process is in motion. And while you may not understand the when, you can still trust the who. Failure has a way of making you feel like you're finished. Like the moment you messed up, the moment you fell short, the moment you didn't live up to the expectations. That's when God must have changed his mind about you. That's when the dream must have died. The purpose must have shifted, and the calling must have been canceled. But that's not how God works. His plan doesn't come with an expiration date that's triggered by your mistakes. He doesn't tear up the blueprint of your destiny because you took a wrong turn. The truth is, God's plan was written with your failure in mind. He knew every weakness, every temptation, every decision you would struggle with, and he still called you. He still chose you. He still appointed you. His grace is not surprised by your gaps, and his purpose is not undone by your imperfection. We live in a world that cancels people for slipping up, but God builds his story through people who fall and get back up. Think about Peter, the one who denied Jesus 3 times in his greatest hour of need. Yet that same Peter preached the first sermon after the resurrection and helped launch the church. Think about David, the man after God's own heart, who committed adultery and murder, yet still fulfilled his purpose as king and psalmist. Think about Moses, who killed a man in anger, and yet was still called to lead a nation out of slavery. God doesn't cancel his plan just because you hit rock bottom. Sometimes he uses the rock bottom to become the foundation of something new. Your failure may have shaken your confidence, but it didn't shake your calling. The gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. That means they don't expire when you mess up. They don't dissolve when you stumble. God doesn't operate on perfection. He operates on surrender. He's not looking for flawless vessels. He's looking for willing ones. And if you still have breath, you still have purpose. The enemy would love for you to believe that it's too late, that you've gone too far, that your mistake was too big. He wants to wrap your failure in shame and call it final. But shame is not from God. Grace is. Grace doesn't excuse the failure, but it empowers you to rise from it. Grace says, yes, you fell, but you're not finished. Grace says, yes, you missed it, but my mercy is new every morning. Grace says, I saw the worst in you, and I still have a plan for you. When God called you, He called the real you, the one who struggles, the one who battles fear, the one who sometimes doubts, the one who didn't get it right the first time. He called you with the full knowledge of your weakness, and He still believed you were worth using. The very thing you thought disqualified you might be the thing He'll use to show His glory through you. God gets glory from redemption, not perfection. That's why He specializes in using the broken, the unlikely, the ones who feel disqualified. He loves to rewrite stories the world calls finished. But you have to stop agreeing with the voice that says it's over. You have to stop rehearsing the failure and start remembering the favor. The fact that you're still here is proof that God's not done. The fact that you still feel the pull toward purpose means the plan is still alive. It may look different now. It may take a new route. It may require healing and humility, but it's not over. You haven't missed your moment. You haven't lost your place. God is the master of restoration, not just putting things back together, but making them stronger than before. What you thought ruined everything may be the very thing He uses to reach someone else. Your story, even the parts you wish never happened, carries power when placed in God's hands. Don't let the failure define you. Let it refine you. Let it teach you. Let it push you deeper into grace, into purpose, into dependence on Him. Because the plan of God doesn't expire just because you failed, you're closer than you think. Even if everything around you is telling you to give up, it's in the moments where you feel most drained, most discouraged, most defeated. That's often when you're on the edge of breakthrough. But the enemy doesn't want you to see that. Because if you knew how near you were to the promise, you wouldn't be entertaining the lies that tell you to settle. You wouldn't be questioning your worth, your calling, or your progress. You wouldn't be second guessing the seeds you've been planting just because the harvest hasn't shown up yet. Sometimes the silence gets so loud and the resistance feels so strong that you start to assume the delay means denial, that the opposition means you've missed it. But what if the pressure is just proof that you're pushing through the final layer before the breakthrough comes? What if the pain you feel right now is not a sign of failure, but the stretching required to carry the next level of what God is about to release in your life? So many people stop at the edge of something holy because they can't see the finish line. But just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not right in front of you. The thing about faith is that it requires vision beyond what your eyes can verify. It requires trusting God's positioning even when your path looks unpredictable. You've prayed, you've fasted, you've cried, you've waited, and now you're tired. And that tiredness makes you vulnerable to lies, to apathy, to bitterness. But even in your exhaustion, God is still moving. The fact that you've endured this long is not weakness. It's evidence of grace. You've survived what was meant to destroy you. You've held on when walking away would have been easier. You've kept sowing when the ground looked dry. And God doesn't overlook faith like that. He honors it. But the reward doesn't always come when you expect it. Sometimes He waits until you reach the edge of yourself to show you that what's next can't be earned, only received. And it's in that vulnerable space, when you feel like you're hanging on by a thread, that you realize his strength was holding you all along. You're closer than you think, not just to the answer to your prayer, but to the version of yourself that can handle it. Because if he gave it to you too early, it would crush you. If he opened the door before your heart was healed, you'd sabotage the blessing. If he promoted you before your character was ready, you'd collapse under the weight. That's why it's taken time. That's why you've walked through seasons that didn't make sense. He wasn't punishing you. He was preparing you. He was pruning you. He was training you to trust him in the tension, not just in the triumph. You may have walked through the valley of rejection, betrayal, silence, or confusion, but you didn't die there. You didn't lose your mind. You didn't let go completely. And that mustard seed of faith, even if it's barely hanging on, is still enough for God to move. Sometimes the enemy will fight you hardest right before the breakthrough, because he knows what's on the other side. He knows that if you ever saw what God is about to do, you'd never again believe another lie about giving up. That's why the storm has felt heavier lately. That's why the confusion increased. That's why you've been feeling spiritual resistance. Not because you're losing, but because you're winning. Not because you're off track, but because you're right where God wants you. You're closer than you think. To clarity, to healing, to peace. To the answered prayer, to the open door, to the fresh start, to the divine connection, to the moment where everything begins to make sense. You can't afford to quit now. What if the next praise breaks the chain? What if the next step shifts the season? What if the next day brings the release you've been crying out for? The pain you're feeling has purpose, and the tension you're navigating is a sign that something is about to change. You are not being buried. You are being planted. And the breakthrough is closer than your emotions are telling you. Pain has a purpose, even when it feels pointless, even when it breaks you in places you didn't even know could break. We try to avoid it, numb it, escape it. But pain has a way of showing up uninvited and staying longer than we ever wanted. And when it does, it's easy to believe the lie that nothing good can come from it, that suffering is just suffering, that heartbreak is just destruction. But in God's hands, pain is not wasted. It's worked into the very process of shaping who we're becoming. It's not just something we go through. It's something he uses to refine us. Sometimes the greatest growth happens in the dark, in the hidden places where no one sees the struggle, where you're holding it together by faith and tears and trust that barely feels real. And it's there, in that private wrestling, where God begins to do a work that couldn't be done in the light. He meets you in the low places, not to shame you, but to show you that his strength was never dependent on your circumstances being comfortable. We grow in pain in ways we never could in peace. Pain teaches. It exposes what comfort conceals. It brings to the surface what we've buried under business and pride and distractions. It purifies our motives. It clarifies our vision. It pulls us out of self-sufficiency and throws us into dependence. Pain shows us how much we actually need God, not just his blessings, not just his favor, but his presence, his nearness, his voice that reminds us we're not alone. There's a weight to pain that presses us down, but also a power in pain that presses us deeper into purpose. If you let it, pain can become the place where you stop pretending and start surrendering. It becomes the doorway where your strength ends and his begins. And though you may feel like it's breaking you, it's also building something in you. Endurance, compassion, empathy, resilience. The version of you that will carry the calling isn't born in comfort. It's forged in the fire. You don't learn to worship in spirit and in truth until worship becomes a choice in the middle of the ache. You don't know real faith until you have to trust God without a reason, without a timeline, without a backup plan. Pain strips away the fluff and gets down to the root. It's in those moments of deep, soul-level pain that you find out what you really believe. Not just about God, but about yourself, about purpose, about identity. You learn to stop performing and start being honest, even if that honesty sounds like, I don't get this. Or God, I'm angry. Or God, where are you? And the beautiful truth is, he's not intimidated by your questions or threatened by your tears. He draws near to the brokenhearted, not after they're healed, but while they're still bleeding. He sits with you in the ashes, not to remind you of what you lost, but to begin rebuilding something eternal out of it. The thing about pain is that it reveals. It shows us what we cling to when everything else is taken away. It reveals where our trust really lies. And if we let it do its full work, pain will push us toward purpose in ways that blessing never could. Because blessing can become a distraction, but pain always demands attention. Pain doesn't ask politely. It screams, it interrupts, it breaks the schedule. But sometimes it has to break the routine to break us free. Some of the greatest things God will do through your life will come out of the things that hurt the most. The loss, the betrayal, the sickness, the disappointment. It may look like devastation on the surface, but it can become revelation if you give it back to God. He never causes pain without weaving purpose through every thread of it. And no, it may not be instant, and it rarely makes sense in the middle of it. But when you look back, you'll realize the very thing you thought would end you was the thing God used to birth something new in you. There's oil that only flows from crushed places, wisdom that only grows in wounded hearts, ministry that only comes from a place of deep scars that now carry healing. God is doing more than you can see right now. Even when it feels like nothing is happening, even when the silence feels suffocating and the waiting feels endless. It's easy to assume that God is inactive when life feels stagnant, when prayers seem unanswered, when progress feels invisible. But just because you can't see the movement doesn't mean the momentum has stopped. God works in layers far deeper than our understanding, in realms beyond our visibility, in ways that don't always show up in instant results or immediate changes. We tend to measure progress by what's happening around us, but God is more interested in what's happening within us. He doesn't always show his hand while he's working, because part of faith is trusting that he's moving even when he's hidden. Sometimes the most profound miracles are the ones being developed in the dark. Under the surface, behind the scenes, inside your heart. What looks like stillness is often sacred setup. What feels like delay is often divine design. God is orchestrating things you haven't even prayed for yet, aligning people you haven't met, opening doors you don't even know you'll need, and preparing you for opportunities that will require a version of you that's still being formed. While you're worrying about what didn't happen, God is working on what's about to. While you're focused on what closed, he's building something new that isn't ready to be revealed yet. But because you can't see it, you start to assume it's not there. That's the deception. That visible silence equals divine absence. But heaven doesn't operate on human timelines, and what God is building in your future often requires a season of being hidden in your present. Seeds don't sprout the day they're planted. They stay buried, unseen, seemingly dead. And yet something powerful is taking place beneath the surface. Roots are growing. Foundations are forming. Strength is being built where no one can see it. And if you pulled the seed out just because you couldn't see the fruit, you'd kill what was in the process of growing. That's how many of us treat our journey. We give up on it too soon because we can't see the evidence of what God is doing. But faith means trusting the God you can't trace. It means walking when there's no visible path. It means believing that the silence is not the end of the story, but a chapter where your spiritual senses are being trained to trust deeper. And often, God will let you sit in that unknown space not because he's cruel, but because he's cultivating something sacred. He's shifting your desires, refining your motives, developing endurance, stretching your perspective, and teaching you that his presence is not proven by outcomes, but by peace in the middle of uncertainty. You think you're waiting for the breakthrough, but maybe the breakthrough is already happening. Not in your job, not in your relationships, not in your finances, but in your spirit. Maybe the change is already underway, just not in the area you expected. Maybe God is using the stillness to show you that His presence is enough, that joy isn't tied to circumstance, that purpose doesn't require applause. He's detaching you from the need for everything to make sense. He's showing you how to walk by faith and not by sight. And in the meantime, He's doing more than you think, preparing people to bless you, releasing healing you haven't felt yet, writing answers to prayers you haven't even had the words to form. He's softening hearts, shifting atmospheres, reordering steps. He's building bridges you'll soon walk across, even though they're out of sight right now. What you see is never all there is. There is always more happening in the spiritual realm than what you perceive in the natural. That's why prayer is powerful, because it invites heaven into what looks impossible. That's why worship matters, because it shifts your focus from what's not changing to the one who never changes. And that's why you can't quit just because it looks quiet. God is not bound by what you feel. His hand is not tied by what you don't see. He's not inactive just because your plans paused. He's working in the tension, in the shadows, in the waiting, in the struggle, in the places that feel like nothing is moving at all, when in reality, everything is aligning perfectly according to a plan that has always been greater than your perspective.